Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Zack Urlocker with Sun Microsystems, previously with MySQL, and we've got our community town hall this morning. And with us in the studio, we have Rich Green and Jonathan Schwartz, and we'll be opening up for a chat. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Martin Mikos, the CEO of MySQL, here today. He's in Trondheim, Norway, meeting with some of our developers. But we do have some tape from Martin saying welcome. So let's see that tape. I think I can drink water.
Hello everyone. Hello users, customers, partners and employees. I'm sorry I can't be here in person right now. I'm in Trondheim, Norway, getting acquainted with new colleagues and database experts there. But I'm very excited about the whole acquisition, being part of Sun. This is a big dream for us. We are building a huge business. I would love to be there right now with Jonathan, Rich and for a toast and a Scandinavian drinking song, but we'll have to do that another time. There will be many opportunities for it. Anyhow, our business is the same as before, only accelerated. We'll work on all platforms, Linux, Windows and Solaris. We'll work on all operating systems. We will be actively engaged with the community as before, and we'll try to build an even bigger business. And that's the big excitement here for me. So thank you very much and stay tuned for all the things that will come.
Thanks, Martin. And again, we have a worldwide audience here. So we have several hundred people on the online chat. If you'd like to send questions, feel free at any time. If you can say your name and where you're from, that would be excellent. And then we'll queue those up in probably about 15 minutes, so not immediately. But I want to first start off and just ask you, Jonathan, I mean, you've obviously driven this deal, this acquisition of MySQL. You've been getting into open source at Sun for a number of years. How did this come about? I mean, it used to be Sun was a very, very different company, and it's changed a lot over the years.
Well, a couple things. First of all, he drove the deal. So just to be clear, when when it's all measured in hindsight, I'm going to hold Rich accountable.
When the book is written.
When the book is written, right? I'll have the intro, and then Rich will write the rest of the chapters. But more seriously, we have been driving large-scale developer communities for a very long time. And there was obviously a profound shift in the definition of community about a decade ago, which is it's not just about using the technology, it's about creating and inventing and innovating inside the technology as well as around it. So one of the strongest communities that both Rich and I saw, even as long ago as 5 or 6 years ago, was the evolution of MySQL. And as I had joked about on my blog a little bit, I'd get together with Martin about once a year, and Rich and I have known him for a number of years, and it would inevitably come down to, geez, Martin, why, don't you want to maybe put the two companies together? Wouldn't it make a lot of sense? We could help really, put some real financial muscle and global reach into the pool of options you have. And he would always manage a way to say, thank you very much, I'm very flattered, and then go talk about something else. And the joke was he'd always go talk about Finland or something. And, it was like clockwork. Once every 6 months or so, I'd get together with Martin and we'd have a good chat. And I'd kind of pop the question, geez, what do you think about putting the two companies together? And he'd say, let's talk about Finland. And this past year, Rich and I were once again, and we've been fairly aggressive about saying, well, what are all the ways we can change, Sun's market opportunity? And Rich brought up, well, we should really think about going out and sitting down with Martin at MySQL again. And my response was, been there, done that, about 5 years. I know a lot about Finland right now, but maybe we could think about other options. And so we both called up Martin and said, what do you think about getting together and having dinner? And we had a great dinner. We once again talked about how we saw the marketplace. And it was remarkable in part because I think MySQL has been, as it's grown, it's definitely changed how it looks at the world. But simultaneously, as Sun has grown, we've changed how we look at the world. And it was remarkable for both of us how similar we saw the world.
Well, that was the interesting thing that as an outsider of Sun during this time, I kept seeing these major announcements, and they were kind of really radical from the point of view of what Sun, the way Sun used to operate. First, getting into, x64 machines, supporting Linux, open sourcing, Solaris, open sourcing Java. I mean, but this must have been a pretty massive change inside of Sun. I mean, how did that come about?
Well, I was at Sun from '89 to 2004 and left for a couple of years and got to watch Sun for a while from the outside before I rejoined in '06. And I think it was less of an impactful change inside the company than from outside the company. Inside the company for years, we always thought of ourselves as, open interfaces, an open company. And so, the move to open source was a very natural set of evolutionary changes. It certainly wasn't without hurdles. There was cultural change that had to be put in place. But as the physics of our business model was established in the 80s about openness, and so this is just sort of the extrapolation of that. And so, as Jonathan said, we've been looking at the portfolio for a while, and I think we've been doing really well with open source as well as the breadth of technology we had, but we have this enormous gap in an area of database that we just felt without filling, we just didn't have the right mix of technology, and so one more dinner with Martin was required, and as many dinners with Martin would be required to make sure the gap was filled.
Yep. Okay. I mean, Jonathan, it seemed to me a pretty ballsy move for a CEO to spend $1 billion. Can I say ballsy on the air? Is that okay?
I think you just did.
You just did.
Yeah. Okay, good. Then we're in the clear. But it seemed like a pretty bold move to spend $1 billion on an acquisition. What kind? Was that something that was hard to do?
So I think the moving to we are the largest company on earth that is an active driver of open source, not just in terms of we laud it and we're happy it exists in the world, but our technologies will be open, all of them. And so once we got through that, and that I think was, for some people inside of Sun, was, it was like a breath of fresh air. Thank God, management finally gets it. For, I would claim, the majority of the company, it was oh my God, you're giving away the crown jewels. We do $2 billion a year in R&D and you're going to give it away? Why are you doing that? But once we got our heads around, as a leadership group, our heads around what's actually going on is the free distribution of architectures. And it really comes down to a following very basic thing. The means of production of creating an architecture they've become so affordable that anybody can now do it. So the choice you have isn't whether or not you should give your architectures away. It's, if you don't, then someone else's will be picked. So if you're really committed to developers, as much as we are in the DNA of Sun, there is no more important constituency in terms of our broad strategy than making sure that next generation of developers understand what we do. If that really is the core of the company, then $1 billion is simply $1 billion investing in the future. And in that case, of course, there's financial hurdles that we're going to set that have already been set. But that was actually, I mean, you all, as you well know, we're a very, very successful business. So the transaction cost for us was, can we, number one, we're buying a financial asset, not just a strategic asset. Number two, we can probably help that asset grow even faster. I mean, the reactions that we've gotten from some of our most traditional customers is, this is fantastic, you've given me a new set of options. So there's upside there. And then the third thing to remember, and it's always a little discomforting to talk about hardware when you're talking to a software community, but at the end of the day, you can't just download MySQL onto air. You have to actually download it onto a computer. Nope. And given what databases tend to do is they tend to store a lot of things, so there's often storage around. And we build that. And so being able to introduce ourselves to an audience that frankly doesn't even know Sun very well at all is, all three of those represent very interesting, financial upside for Sun. Now, the fourth, which is a little bit of a wild card, is it also makes the $15 billion database industry just a little bit more competitive.
Well, this to me seems like classic disruption of the marketplace, and that's what we were doing at MySQL, and obviously now with the backing of Sun, it's an even bigger disruption in the market. It seems like now, with the existence of MySQL, there's really a whole stack here at Sun. How does that look for customers?
Well, the stack, I think, is comprised of both technologies that we have constructed at Sun, as well as technologies constructed in the community or from other companies. And the thing we have to be careful about here at Sun is the fundamentals of open source is all about choice, and we think with the rate of downloads of Glassfish, 4 million downloads in just a short amount of time, and the acceleration of Solaris, we have a lot of value to bring to the community. But there's a lot of things we're doing to partner in the community to make sure people get what they want, and whether it's on the tool side or on the runtime platform and the scripting languages, I think the thing that we really can do better than almost anyone is offer this mix in an optimized form on the platforms they want to build sort of the next great thing. And it's keeping our eyes open to that mix and not being stuck on, well, you know, we are the keepers of Glassfish, and thus the answer will always be MySQL and Glassfish. But instead, it has to be, well, what are people trying to use, and how can we make it better? And that's where we're going to be focusing our efforts.
Okay. I mean, MySQL runs on about 24 different platforms, and obviously, you know, Linux has been very popular. That's the #1 platform. Windows #2, Solaris #3. A lot of people don't know it, but it was actually originally written on Solaris, so it performs really well there. Do you see any changes there now being as a part of Sun that should customers be thinking about migrating from one platform to another?
So first of all, absolutely not. As Rich pointed out, you know, we want to innovate everywhere, and to the extent that we can reach into every community in the world. So the one correction I'd actually have for you is Linux is not your #1 platform for developers. Windows is, in all likelihood, your #1 platform for developers. So we would be no more likely to say, okay, Windows is not important, let's go bias all of our developer activity to Linux, because the number of Linux desktops in the world is dwarfed by the number of Windows desktops. Simultaneously, on the server side, it's an IQ test. I mean, the last thing in the world we would do is say, if you want to run MySQL, you can only run it here, because that actually minimizes the number of opportunities we have to reach the marketplace. So if you look at what we've done at Sun, we've begun to assemble our products, if I can bring you back to high school geometry, into a kind of Venn diagram, where we'd love it if folks who run Glassfish also looked at MySQL, because we think there's a lot of affinity between the two. But on the other hand, those who want to run it against Postgres or run it against Oracle, we don't want to miss those opportunities. So we're going to go build Glassfish in the open community. And then, by the way, that'll be a process of watching what the community does and listening to the market feedback. So we don't tie products together. It's just, it's a bad way of driving strategy. We want to innovate, you know, in a more synchronized way, because we think there's a lot we can do just given the pool of talent and the pool of assets. And of course we want to be able to deliver a complete platform for customers who say that's what they want day one. But we're interested in reaching customers, not customers who run our products.
Okay, so it's not just one stack, then really the customer gets to choose whichever slice in the stack that they want to go with. Is that fair?
You bet. And I think, you know, we dominantly see three operating systems as driving the deployment opportunity. And those 3 operating systems are, as you point out, #1 Linux by far and away, #2 Windows, and then #3 Solaris. So we're going to continue to invest there aggressively. Does that mean we're not going to invest in a port onto, you know, a new ARM platform? No, we're going to invest where we think, you know, interesting new technologies are emerging and interesting markets are opening up.
Okay, so Linux users, you can relax. We've got new builds coming out on Linux, on Windows. We can keep doing that. That's excellent news. I know Kai is probably feeling a little bit better on that. And I know that's actually, you guys have been completely consistent, but that was actually, I think that must have been the first question from Martin and I when we had dinner in San Francisco.
Well, it might have been the first question from Martin, but I think before he even teed up the question to you, we had been talking about it for a long time. And it's not as if it's precedent. I mean, OpenOffice runs on Windows predominantly, Linux second, Solaris distant third. We're helping port Solaris to IBM mainframes. Yep. You know, the combinatorics of our platforms and operating systems and hardware has never been greater. And again, it's driven by the market. It's not dictated by us. And so
is Glassfish on Linux?
Of course, Glassfish is on Linux and Windows and lots of other operating systems as well.
We haven't done our Symbian port yet, but you know, we're going to get.
There's a Symbian port of MySQL.
That's why I raised it. So we haven't done our Glassfish work.
Actually, Glassfish v3 will be appropriate for a Symbian port. So stay tuned. Okay. So again, not nearly precedent. This is more of what we've been doing.
And we got a couple questions coming in. So one was, what's the definitive way to pronounce MySQL? And it's just like I said, MySQL. But if you say MySQL, we're okay with that.
You are okay with that?
I'm okay with it. The founders sometimes
Martin
get a little
has corrected
upset.
me only once. He's a big guy, and I listened to him very clearly. He said, "Rich, it's MySQL." I said, "Thank you, sir," and I haven't changed yet.
I was in presenting to a very large Swedish industrial company, and I walked in and said, now I want to tell you all about MySQL. And 3 of the Swedes in the room said, that's actually not how you pronounced it. And then they gave me a more interesting pronunciation to the MY, which sounded more like like Mew. As Americans, we can't actually pronounce that. So I don't know. I would look to you. You're the keeper of the brand and the steward.
MySQL works. If you call it MySQL, that's okay. If you're a customer, particularly, we're flexible there. But now we talked a little bit about developers, and I know winning the hearts and minds of developers is absolutely key. And there's one issue that comes up time and time, and I think we have to settle this once and for all. VI or Emacs? Which is it?
Whatever your fingers know. Whatever your fingers know best.
Use VI? Emacs?
Who in their right mind would use VI? I mean, come on. Why would you use VI?
Well, I'm older, so that's all I'm saying.
Okay. So I did have a question. Somebody asked me, when am I going to get a ponytail? So we actually have a secret Jonathan Schwartz lookalike society.
I heard about that.
And I'm growing my hair. Actually, it was for
But
charity,
you realize that the most important part of the secret Jonathan Schwartz Club is you have to deny the existence.
That's right.
And you've just blown it.
No such thing. If there was. But
Actually, the extension to that is you have to set a precedent or a milestone under which you will cut it off. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I might get banned from this secret society if it actually exists. So now, Rich, you've just come back from Tech Days in India, and I think there's some more coming up. What's been the response from developers around the world?
Well, Tech Days is this program that we run worldwide. We have 13 or 14 events. India is the single largest developer event we run outside of Java 1. There were about 10,000 people at Hyderabad. It was also broadcast to Bangalore and Chennai, I believe. The response was extremely positive, as it's been everywhere. I would say in India, I think the notion of open source databases is nascent or earlier than in other regions where I think it's more commonly accepted. I think there's more classic IT that I saw in India. So we had a couple of special events with the press and with CIOs and talked about open source and indemnification and all the notions around protection and safety that goes along with open source and all the notions that go with how open code can provide more secure implementations than proprietary code. There was a lot of head nodding, a lot of interest. So it was quite a positive event.
Excellent, excellent. And one of the things that we've tried to do at MySQL is open up our development processes. This is an area where we'd like to actually maybe learn a little bit more from some of the other teams at Sun. How do you guys do open source but still make it open to outside contribution, for example? So even though you have a lot of the internal developers, how do you open it up to the world? Well,
we have really worked hard, I would say, struggled at times to figure out how to find that balance. And I think we've done in some areas, Glassfish, for example, or NetBeans, a very good job of doing it, where development, first of all, has to be pushed outside of the firewall and done in the public eye. There has to be, every step you take has to be done visible to everyone. There has to be, obviously, some screening process, and I think there's some gradient, depending on the kind of technology, about the kind of screening or analysis that allows putbacks to be made, put into the code base. As you get closer to the kernel of the operating system or the VM or the core database engine, I think more scrutiny has to be applied to who can be contributing directly into the code, who has the authority to do that, versus in the periphery of the code. And so being very thoughtful and measured about that, but doing that in a very open fashion, in complete public view, is the key to getting this all done.
And then from a mechanics point of view, what's the Sun contributor license agreement? I've heard that's a very simple kind of form. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, the SCA, the Sun Contributor Agreement, we have just revised it to make it yet simpler, human readable. There's always lawyers who have to touch it, and then it becomes a little obscure. And we spent a little bit of time.
No offense intended to lawyers who might be listening. So.
Yes, I doubt lawyers are listening, but if there are, there's only a modest amount of offense to be taken. And so we did really tidy up what I think was already a very liberal document to go do that. It's automatic. You can just click through it, a quick read. But it is part of the business model that's consistent with both Sun and MySQL before you guys joined.
Well, I think actually when we reviewed Sun's contributor agreement, it looked like yours was simpler than ours, and we were a little bit behind the curve. For a number of years, we just didn't have a good agreement. We got something in place in 2006, and then we started getting more contributions, but we wanted to open that up a little bit.
And I think, there's a few things, at least for folks who, and we were actually just outside talking about this very thing. When you're in a community, there's never going to be unanimity. There's never going to be such a perfect, consensus on every issue that arises.
What's unanimity?
Yes, that everybody agrees that we're all unanimous, that this is, where we, think the world ought to head. And so there's an exceptionally important role to be played by high integrity individuals, stewards, who can make decisions that will, not everybody has to agree to them, but at least they'll be made in the open. And Linus plays this role for the Linux community. And not everybody always agrees with him. He's obviously got some pretty strong views in the world. On the other hand, the coherence of Linux is dependent upon his stewardship, his acumen, his expertise. Every community has the moral equivalent. And early on in the Java days, that was a role that was very, very strongly played by James and James Gosling. And over time, others began to kind of elevate up. So the communities that we're working with now and the contributors agreements that evolve around those communities are all vital for a couple things. One, to maintain the transparency and the integrity of the community. But let's also remember that there's a lot of us that are building businesses in those communities and with those communities. And there is definitely a bit of a quid pro quo. Outsiders have the opportunity to access the technology for free, to use it and to influence it. But simultaneously, we want to grow a bigger business, so we're not putting $2 billion a year into open source. We're putting $3 billion into open source. So there's always going to be a dialogue. Communities are diverse, and I think that's something we fundamentally respect.
Excellent. Okay. Now, one of the issues that came up most recently was there's some questions about the patent policy. And MySQL had a history of being very much against software patents.
Right.
We helped launch an initiative, nosoftwarepatents.com. And even, I don't know that everyone knows it, but we were very clear that we actually had some patents at MySQL, patents that we had acquired when we picked up the technology that became MySQL Cluster.
Right.
Sun's patent policy is a little bit different. What can you tell people about that?
So we first and foremost, believe that the assets that we have are of use to those who I think share the views that you just described. So I wouldn't be so far as to say software patents are bad. Software patents are assets that we currently maintain at Sun, and we have 12, 13,000 patents that across the world.
We thought we were doing pretty good with about 6.
Right. So we have one of the most fundamental collections of patents with respect to how the network is evolving. We don't use those patents offensively. We use those patents in defense. And so I'd like to view that, and I'd like the open source community to understand those are assets that are now at our collective disposal. We're going to use those to protect the open source community. So there was, for example, patent litigation was filed against a Linux vendor recently. And behind the scenes, we reached out to the Linux vendor and said, we'll make our trove of patents available to you to make sure that you can go back against the individual who's filing those patents against you. Or we'll put our resources into play to go undermine the patent that's being used offensively. So software patents definitely have a role to play in the world. We want to make sure that that is a positive role, and it can be used not to go forestall innovation or to say, I had that idea before you did. I don't believe that's a legitimate usage of those patents. But we want to be progressive and constructive with it. So it's a very different thing. And again, I'd turn this back to you. So now you have 12,000 patents at your disposal. You obviously had a frame of mind at MySQL, which was, and I'm going to interpret here,
yep.
You tell me, because now I'm doing the interviewing, that you wanted to remove patents from the dialogue because you wanted to compete based on innovation and not on somebody's printed documents. So now that you have 12,000 patents at your disposal, 13,000, whatever the number is, what are you going to do with them?
Well, my first answer is we'll give them away, but I'm not sure if that's the right answer. But I think we're in sync in terms of we only used our patents defensively. We never actually had to use them, which was good, but we recognized in the legal environment, whether we thought software patents were good or bad, we had to work within the system. And so that's why we actually had those patents, was strictly for defensive purposes.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I think we share that. And by the way, we do give them away, which is when you join the communities, when you are when you sign up to those licenses, you are in effect getting a grant to the patents. So, like I said before, it's a very complex realm. We have no interest whatever in being an offensive patent litigator. We have a huge interest in driving innovation and using the assets that we have, all of them, to go continue to fuel that innovation. Because, we're not a company that monetizes the past. We're a company that tries to invent the future, and as much of the obstacles to the future we can get out of the way that we can, we're going to go do that.
Okay. Now, we have a couple questions coming in. I have one from Lenz, I think in Germany, and the question is, and maybe this is for you, Rich, can can Sun allocate more resources to help improve performance of MySQL on Linux?
Well, we already have. I mean, one of the highest priorities we have in talking to customers as well as talking to your team is what can we do on multi-core, multi-processor systems, memcache issues, etc. We've already allocated about 40 people additionally inside the company who have expertise in database performance, and we've done this kind of work for years. And to be clear, not just for Solaris, right? Yep. So for Linux in particular. So you'll see evolution of those things. Now, maybe this is making the counterpoint, so I have to be careful here, but we ran an experiment with some early changes. We already saw a 36% performance improvement on Solaris. We're still running the test now on Linux, don't have those numbers. But
they'll get better.
Way better.
36% increase in performance out of the gate. That seems pretty good.
Well, it's not bad for 2 weeks of work. Yep. And so, you know, when you think
will that double in the next 2 weeks?
Well, I think it's imprudent to extrapolate like that, but there's a lot of opportunity, I think, given the expertise we have.
We have such deep expertise in database performance. I mean, the company, if you think about it, you know, Greg Papadopoulos had this great phrase a while back. There's only 3 kinds of applications that matter on the network. Small databases, medium databases, and big databases. So, you know, one of the things we worried about prior, especially to the close of the acquisition, was as soon as we get all the teams around Sun that are interested in helping MySQL, as soon as we actually let them get in touch with MySQL, we'll just bury them. Because there's so many people from the performance team, the benchmarking team, the optimization teams, you know, from around the company that want to come help. And these are folks, by the way, that aren't, you know, this is the Glassfish team saying, how do we make sure that MySQL and Glassfish run well? This is the NetBeans team. It's the x64 hardware team. It's the Spark hardware team. It's the Solaris team. It's everybody who's out there.
Yeah, to clarify, well, you know, one of the discussions I had with Martin fairly early on, once it was clear that this was going to come together, is for you and Jeffrey and others, keep going with your plan of record, and we'll be able to bring other resources for optimization on lots of platforms that won't dilute the innovation work you're doing. So it'll be supplementing rather than redirecting in terms of that optimization work. So I think, you know, a lot of the existing MySQL customers will see a rapid change in terms of increased performance and scalability on more modern systems that they're all deploying, AMD, Intel, ultimately Spark systems as well. So you know, they're already here working on it.
Excellent. Well, I know Robin, who runs our product management group, was at the Sun Immersion Week in Chicago last week, and he was just so excited when he met some of the guys from the performance teams and the benchmarking teams. And it's just guys who can do stuff that we just never had the bandwidth. We didn't have the equipment to do all this, and now we can apply that both with our internal engineers and then get some help in some areas.
Hey, maybe he knows that. What's an immersion week?
Immersion week. Well, I guess that's for the SE system engineers to get trained on new technology.
Yeah. Well, and probably the most exciting new technology at Sun right now is MySQL.
And we are getting a lot of emails.
Like I said, I mean, I really worry about, like, let's not bury them. So the other thing, I actually found out, so as I mentioned also in my blog, we just opened the world's largest open supercomputing facility in Texas called the Ranger platform. And it's more than 4,000 quad-core processors, you know, gargantuan amounts of memory, huge amounts of pooled storage. And it's an open platform, so people can actually submit and request time on it.
So can we get a week on those systems?
And the answer is yes.
All right, Jonathan said so.
So I don't know how much time we have, but we, you know, just given the role we played in helping to put it together, we have access to it to help, you know, engineer new products. So I think we're going to have an opportunity to get MySQL running on the world's largest supercomputers. And you want to talk about working in parallel at scale, there's probably no better example, no better place to go do it. And by the way, that is a, you know, that's running CentOS. That's not a Solaris farm. That's not a Spark farm. That's a CentOS running on x64. Let's go down and let's see what we can do.
Excellent. Well, it seems that this leads into the whole trend of, you know, and I know you hate this word, cloud computing, but we're seeing more and more of, you know, stuff out in the network. Cloud computing. Cloud. It's a new term.
Okay.
You know, what can you say about Sun's other projects in this area?
Well, you know, we've been working on this program called Network.com for some time, and up until about 6 or 8 months ago, it was focused more on a hosting platform versus a services platform, and we've radically altered the course. You'll see over the next couple of months us deploying on the network.com platform a host of developer-centric services and developer-centric environments, places to do development, to store your code, to deploy your code, to run services, to access CPUs in a way that allows you to sort of spread your application over the net using the cloud word, I guess.
Clown? Did you say clown?
I think I said clown this time.
Clown computing.
So spreading the services out, and obviously in that regard, using a virtualization technology or anybody else's on network.com, it's a perfect place to host a service-based MySQL platform. And so,
are you announcing that today?
I'm happy to tell you that we're going to do it. So I guess if that's the form of an announcement.
Rich Green, Executive Vice President of Software at Sun, just formally announced that we're going to be delivering MySQL as a service from network.com.
That's correct.
Excellent. I guess we better
I didn't
make
even
that
know.
happen,
I love
right?
that. That's what I love about Sun. You know? May 1,000 flowers bloom.
Excellent.
1001. Right.
Now we have a business question coming in, and again, if you want to say where you're from in your question, then that's helpful. I don't know where this one's from, but it's kind of a business question. What is Sun doing to ramp up resources to drive adoption of MySQL in both the enterprise market and among software ISVs?
So, in and among the enterprise market, one of the challenging things about traditional back office enterprise computing is it is a marketplace defined by hand-to-hand combat. And so we've got a lot of hands. We have roughly, just to give you order of magnitude of what Sun is, what our scale is, we're about 33,000 people in the world. 17,000 of those are people in the field. And you could probably double that again in terms of the number of partners that we work with. So the 30,000 or so folks that really man the field organization, who touch customers on a daily basis, are completely outfitted now with an understanding. You helped author most of this. What is MySQL? What's it good for? Where should it be used? What's the right environment for it? How should people think about it? And they're out not only evangelizing today in mainstream enterprises, and I'm talking about ball bearing companies, tire manufacturing companies, retailers, manufacturers, along with banks and telecommunications companies all across the world. And now we're, one of the first things we did when MySQL became a part of Sun is we said, Sun Microsystems will now stand behind, with our entire field service organization, stand behind the deployment of MySQL in the most mission-critical application environments you can think about. So anybody that might have been uncomfortable betting on a 400-person company can now say, all right, well, now I feel better because I'm in 50 nations in the world, and I want 24/7 global support able to come out and visit me no matter where I am, and we can do that. So just that subtle change, which really goes to the MySQL support team and says, okay, you were doing a great job, but your resource pool was this big. We'd like to give you a resource pool this big. Now what can we go do together? That just changes how MySQL is thought about. So that, in addition to things like this, we're putting a tremendous amount of time and energy. Rich is standing on stage in Hyderabad in front of 8,000 people saying, let me tell you about MySQL. And it's always surprising to me, getting back to one of the points that Rich was making, that Japan, for example, is a big Postgres community, but isn't yet a big MySQL community. India has tended to be a very enormous Oracle community, and to a lesser extent, a big Microsoft SQL Server community. So we're going to be introducing MySQL into those communities. And from our vantage point, this is not a, pick one or the other. This is every application ultimately finds its right home. Let's make sure that we're delivering it into the right application environments. We think, MySQL and Postgres are kind of a match made in heaven. They do very different things. They're for very different environments. The fact that we're behind both means we can go reach out into Japan, into more traditional application environments, as well as get to the new online world.
In fact, there's a follow-up question. So since you brought up Postgres and Oracle, at MySQL, we never tried to displace a database. We weren't trying to get customers to migrate from one thing to another, because once a database is in production,
you're done.
You really don't want to switch it,
right.
Ever pretty much. So we have, that's why there's systems out running still 3.23 or 4.0, et cetera, and we try to get them to just upgrade to the next MySQL version. But how does that fit in? Where do you see these different databases, both at Sun, like in the previous Clustra technology, as well as Oracle as a partner of Sun's? How does all that fit together?
Rich?
Well, I think one example is the first thing we did after we announced the closing of the acquisition was we transferred the Postgres SQL team and the Derby team to Martin's organization, right? And it's because there's this there's this wealth of technology that we have that we want to preserve and keep growing. There are different technologies for different audiences, and there are different factions of individuals in different markets and different geos that like to deploy different platforms. So even within Sun, we're demonstrating that we're going to keep going full speed on PostgreSQL and JavaDB or Derby, as well as with MySQL. Now, with regard to third-party partners, this is a $15 billion market, as Jonathan has said before, and it's unfortunate that there's this one-word database that describes this $15 billion thing, but implicit in that is this diversity of deployments, of SLAs, of usage types that require lots of different tools, lots of different technologies to cover the needs of the market. And the acquisition and partnership with MySQL in no way changes the fact that there's lots of other database technologies that are going to be required today and in the foreseeable future for lots of deployments that will work closely in partnership with Sun. So we're going to keep going full speed with our partners, and it's a big market growing very quickly. So I still think there's huge opportunity without slowing down anything we've been doing.
Okay, so you're not trying to go compete with Oracle or DB2 or SQL Server.
No, I think Martin had a great comment, which was that MySQL was the first large-scale popular database that was built in the Internet era, right? And it's designed principally around distributed computing solutions and web-facing applications. And there's great growth opportunity for MySQL with those 17,000 people that Jonathan described, with the amplification work on performance that we could do in that segment alone. Now, we've talked to a bunch of customers, and they all talk about the fact that outside of the core data center, they're doing more and more deployments with MySQL in the enterprise as well. So we're certainly not a web-only solution. Now, Gartner just published a report that said 66% of all polled enterprises either are using MySQL or will be using MySQL in the next year or two. So there's a great opportunity for MySQL, but it's a big business. We're going to keep going with our other partners.
Well, we've certainly seen the adoption of MySQL in what we would call Web 2.0, Enterprise 2.0, which is enterprise applications running on a web infrastructure, software ISVs, and a lot of business in telco. And I think it's typically in high-performance situations or very large volumes, large scale. I think people know the companies using MySQL. It's companies like Google, Yahoo, applications like Flickr and YouTube, and then more traditional applications, a lot of media, NBC, New York Times, those sort of applications.
Well, and I think a lot of the traditional enterprise market. I was with a company yesterday that asked me, so do you think MySQL will be able to stand up to the load that we put on it? And I said, well, what's your load? And he said, well, we do about 2 million transactions a day. And I said, well, that's interesting. We were just with Facebook, and they told us they serve 200,000 photographs a second. So I'm pretty confident.
You're in the clear.
I'm pretty confident we can help you there. So I just think, I was, and I for the most part, notwithstanding community events like this, spend most of my time with much more traditional executives. And I was in with the CIO of a very large global bank recently, and they're a very good customer, and they're very smart, they're very aggressive. They have not been at all touched by the subprime mortgage issue in the U.S. But their IT practices tend to be a little bit more standard. And toward the end of the meeting, I just said, by the way, you probably noticed we just invested quite heavily in the open source database marketplace with the acquisition of MySQL, and we'd be happy to come back and talk to you about what some of those options might look like. And she looked at me and she said, this was the CIO, well, I don't think we really use MySQL here at the bank. And one of the folks from the MySQL team had managed to get to our account representative beforehand to let him know what the download activity had been at the bank before I had gone in to visit, just so I had a complete briefing of what I should be able to talk about. And he kind of piped up enthusiastically, actually, you've downloaded it about 1,300 times in the past 6 months.
Yep.
And the CTO who was in the room said, actually, we have a fair amount of work going on with MySQL. And
we didn't want to tell anyone.
Exactly. Yes. Well, and I think it's one of those things where, 10 of the top 10 banks in the world run MySQL. There's not a doubt in my mind.
Right.
Now, do we have 10 of the 10 as paying customers? That happens next.
Right.
The first thing you have to do is convince them it's going to help them solve a problem. And I think that process, we're going to do whatever we can to accelerate that, because I think the fact is, it probably scales better, probably performs better, and is undoubtedly more price performant than any other option that we've seen in the marketplace. That's why we're so heavily invested in it.
And actually, this is something that is new for us in as much as we always had 24/7 support, and our support engineers are really proud of what they've been able to do, because it's actually amazing quality support. But when we get into a bank and suddenly their view of 24/7 and having local resources in every country, it's just a whole bigger ballgame. So we've seen a lot of customers, when the news went out, saying, okay, now with Sun behind you guys, we're much more comfortable doing a business deal with you guys.
But on that point, and just to to reach out to the folks that were at MySQL who are delivering support, I've made a lot of statements about we can finally now deliver global support in a very different way. And I know that we were doing that and you were doing it specifically. And by the way, I've heard
now it's 48 by 14.
Yeah, or whatever it is, by 365. Please don't take offense. I mean, the intent was not to say you couldn't possibly deliver the service. I think your quality was extraordinary. The issue wasn't the quality, it was the scale.
Yeah.
And that's something that is just very different in a 9,000 person field service organization than it can be in a 400 person company in totality.
Well, and in that regard, Ulf's team is as Jonathan noted, really skilled and really excellent in providing the service that we talked about. And one of the things that we were very careful about doing when you guys came on board is keeping that team together, right? And keeping the engineering team together, keeping the marketing team together, keeping the sales team together, and not diffusing it into the organization. I think there's been some observations, accurate or not, about Sun in the past, that when we do acquisitions, things get all diluted, all this kind of stuff. And when we thought this one through, we spent a lot of time making sure that we were going to keep these groups intact and make sure that the working style and the sort of global dispersed organizations and the way all you guys work, and in fact the way a lot of Sun works separately, will remain unchanged. And so this isn't merging them in. This is associating them with these organizations, but keeping them intact, and then adding lots more resources using the work style that has been so successful so far.
Well, I've been a part of a number of different transactions, acquisitions, both on the being acquired and the acquiring side. And I have to say, this one has really gone the smoothest. It was done very quickly, which I think was a testament to, the staff both at Sun and at MySQL. But I think it's gone very smoothly, and it's precisely because of that reason. We feel like we're still able to drive, the decisions and do what's right for MySQL users, MySQL customers, and then get benefit from Sun's scale, but not feel like I've never had anyone from Sun say, this is how we do it. You just have to do it this way. Trust us.
Really, not one.
Not yet. Not yet. Well, maybe later today, because I have some meetings.
Right.
Yes.
No. As I talked to a lot of folks in Florida when we announced all this, it's a big company. I'm sure we're going to make a couple of mistakes here and there. The question is how quickly are we going to respond. So it's great that you've said that. I don't expect it to go perfectly, but it was the 0th priority when we talked about doing this, to make sure that this company that works so efficiently and elegantly and has been so successful and has exhibited great community presence and humility in the marketplace and enormous growth, proceeds in the same exact fashion as before. It's good to hear we're still doing it, and if we hear that we're missing on a few spots, we'll respond as quickly as we can.
We've done, and I've probably done 50 acquisitions in my day at Sun, and I'll tell you, the most important, by far and away, the most important attribute of a successful acquisition is cultural alignment, which is the way you think about the world, what you think about your brand, what you think about how you build products, how you engage with customers, what the corporate culture is like. Those things are a much greater determinant of success or failure than almost anything else. So, when I asked, there's an executive at Sun who's in charge of making sure the integration goes well, and I asked him, so, behind the scenes over a drink, so what's it really like? Because you've now been in the organization, and he just looked at me and he said, they're exactly like Sun. Care about innovation, really care about making a difference in the world, really care about the company, have a very emotional attachment to the brand as well as the philosophy of how you do business, and that's great. That's what we believe in.
Well, I think to both points, I guess I would differ on one thing, which is the reason I think it went so quickly is that reason, the cultural alignment, the ethic, the priorities, the business models. Every time we sat down in meetings, we do it this way, we do it the same way. We do it this way, we do it the same way. And there wasn't a whole lot of things to change or barriers to knock down. We just got this done very quickly, and it just seemed like it was one team the day we met.
Well, Jeffrey and I had a kind of an all-day meeting during due diligence, meeting with Karen Padir and Eduardo on the engineering side, and they were looking at things, and we were being grilled for several hours, and at the end we kind of said, well, how are we doing? I mean, how are our processes, and how does it look compared to the way things work at Sun? And they said, hey, it's the same. And then they said, and this thing you do over here, we'd like to do that. We have our bug verification take place outside of engineering, for example. And they loved that. They wanted to figure out a way that they could adopt our model. So that went very well for us. Were there any surprises on the, going through the due diligence or any of the acquisition from a technical perspective, or things you found out about that you didn't know originally?
I think we were a little surprised at how similar. It's a big community, and when we looked at the processes you built or you created to build MySQL, you manage people's data. It's not okay to give them the wrong answer, right? And that actually reminded us of how we build Solaris, because we build Solaris to run 911 networks. People's lives are at risk. It's not a joke. I mean, it really does come down to that. And there's always a trade-off you make between being able to move quickly and to get the next startup and to be able to respond immediately, and then being able to say to somebody, don't worry, all of your hospitals will be up and online and able to deliver service. And it's not okay if they ever go down. So, I think the fact that we could engage in a dialogue around, and there's trade-offs you make, because you end up looking a little more closed when you become a little bit more rigid about how you get things done. On the other hand, you establish a very different reputation for what you do, and you need to be able to respond in both. So I don't think there's a lot that we were surprised by.
No, I think, as I said before, I think virtual machines, operating system kernels, core databases, they're so impactful to the market, and their reliability, the SLA that you provide with those are paramount in terms of success in the market and serving customers. That I don't think there was a surprise. I think outsiders may be surprised that an open source company that was open source from day zero is so responsible, given the physics of the technology that they're working with, that you have to do that. I think the only other surprise there is you guys drink a lot more vodka than we do, and that's something we're happy to go figure out how to keep up with you.
We're drinking.
You're going to drink more.
I see. Okay. Well, we're happy to surf behind you, see what we can do.
So we were also, I guess, somewhat surprised during the due diligence process how many other companies were interested in acquiring you. That, I mean, was absolutely stunning to us. So just to throw that back in your lap.
Yes, there were a few others. So, now, Rich, did you take a look at the Falcon engine? Any thoughts on that?
Well, sure. We've taken a look at the technology. We talked to the heads of the head of the team, and we're very excited about seeing what we can do to accelerate that work. I think there's been a couple of positions in the market about, is this designed to be replacement technology at InnoDB? And the answer is no. This stands by itself as new technology that's really designed for very large-scale web-facing, and I hate to use the clown word again, but cloud computing technology. And so we want to see if we can make that go faster. But again, incremental to the database engine portfolio, not as a replacement.
Yeah, and really that's the idea, is we have a portfolio, lots of different engines, some being developed by our partners, some internally at MySQL, and we have several. Hopefully at our user conference in April, we'll make some more announcements in that area.
Well, I think one of the elegant things that were done in recent years with MySQL is the whole pluggable database engine design, and it's another example of how open things work, where published interfaces get these things normalized, and suddenly others can contribute and provide tuned implementations for the kind of apps. The same kind of work you'd use in an enterprise for transactions is different than you do on the web, is different than you do in telco space, and having a platform that allows you to plug in the different optimization database engines is just this really elegant thing, and so this is another opportunity with Falcon to provide yet more functionality.
It's definitely a different approach. I think MySQL is unique in having these and looking at the different usage scenarios and saying, okay, for data warehousing, you just need a different approach than, say, classic OLTP. One of the other questions we have is, obviously, Sun has been a big proponent, developed Java. That was a huge language. Some people would say Sun seemed to miss the boat on scripting languages for a few years, and now we've got a lot of scripting languages in the web environment, and obviously, lots of PHP developers using MySQL, Perl, Python, VB users, and then there's a bunch of new, I don't know what we call them, sort of hybrid scripting languages based on the Java VM. So you've got JRuby and JPython and Groovy and Scala. Which one should people be using?
I think the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
Right. Again, in the
only more religious issue than editors is programming languages, I guess.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, but it's the most diverse collection of religions in the world, and I don't know if you've seen the news, but we just recently announced that 2 of the lead Python guys in the industry have joined Sun, and just rewinding a little bit, about 18 months ago, we stepped back and looked at our virtual machine and scripting language and language view and said, this is not about just the stuff we've invented. And so we did this separation of the Java virtual machine, the Java language from the virtual machine. And from that came things like JRuby, which is, Ruby on top of the VM and allowing you to do cross calls. But we're also doing native scripting languages. We're providing support to the community and optimizations. So there are a lot of different ways to use scripting languages. There are a lot of scripting languages that are very appropriate to use with MySQL. The answer is yes, right? We can't direct this. We can amplify the directions that people are choosing. And you could see from our actions that we're bringing more and more people on board that can contribute to a wide diverse collection of scripting and programming languages.
And a couple of weeks back when we had the integration meeting, I asked you about NetBeans versus Eclipse. Mm-hmm. You want to repeat what you said there?
Well, the answer is people, Eclipse is extremely popular, right? We're obviously big NetBeans backers, but I think the focus question is, so we want to do some Eclipse modules, right? Is that you going to be okay with that? And the answer is, yeah, because that's what your developers want. So go for it, do it. Now, as I think the caveat I added is, please do NetBeans modules too, but you have to. It's what people want. It's what is going to get their job done. Just go.
And also, simultaneously to the NetBeans team that wants to go do work with Oracle and wants to go do work with Postgres and wants to go, they're obviously, the way Sun is run is you're responsible first and foremost to your product and the success of that product in the community, and then to the success of Sun Microsystems as a whole. But if we're religious about what you could just imagine if we tried to run Sun where everything had to work with everything every day, you'd have the Politburo. You wouldn't actually have an innovative company, and you'd spend the first 6 months of every year planning before you actually wrote the first line of code, and that's probably not the right way to go after a fast-moving market.
More likely 11 months.
11 months, right?
Well, I did submit the renewal for the Eclipse membership, so that's all done.
Okay.
So hopefully that check will clear. And Jonathan, another business question. How do you make money from the acquisition of MySQL?
There's a few ways. Obviously, and again, a lot of folks didn't understand this because they don't pay for MySQL. There's really 2 kinds of companies in the world. Those who've got, and Martin says this more crisply than anybody I've ever met, those who have more time than money. And those are individuals who are, frankly, probably watching this, who want to understand how these free technologies can be used to help them get their jobs done or build their businesses. On the other extreme, you might have that CIO I just met with from the global bank, who doesn't like free software for only one basic reason. If the system goes down on the last trading day of the quarter, she wants to be able to make a phone call and have me or have somebody else at Sun take accountability for the resolution of the problem. So those are the 2 extremes. That's not to say there's not a big gray zone in between, but the 2 extremes are those that will only use free software and those who can't actually use free software absent a commercial support agreement. So we make our money here. What do we do here? We try to cultivate. This is why we call it a developer community. One of the smartest people I know in the marketplace said, developers don't buy things, they join them.
Yep.
And so our object is to have as many people as possible join our communities. How will we then make money? The odds are good if they're successful, they'll end up as one of those customers on the right. And a company like Facebook is actually a wonderful example of this, because as you well know, in December of this past year, they became a paying customer to MySQL. And yet 4 years ago, when Mark Zuckerberg was in his dorm room at Harvard, I actually had the privilege of having lunch with him, and I asked him, why'd you pick MySQL? And he looked at me, he's like, well, it was free. So at the point that he made that decision, that was an incredibly important decision for how that data center would ultimately emerge. And today, that data center is, roughly speaking, 10,000 systems growing 3 to 5% a week.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of servers.
That's a lot of infrastructure, and we obviously want to play a role not just in Facebook's infrastructure, but in Minglebox and Google, as well as more traditional companies and traditional telecommunications companies. But the most important leading indicator for the health of our business is, are the developers engaged? Because if they're not engaged, you got big problems.
Yep.
And I think we have missed, in fairness, a few very significant shifts and trends in the marketplace because historically we were a little too religious about, well, it has to start with our product name. It's like, well, no, it has to start with a developer or a marketplace. Once you get that right, everything else becomes clear.
Well, I think there are two follow-up points that really define how this works, which is, people don't change the architecture that they start with by and large. As you noted, databases are very sticky, and in general architectures are persistent across time. But many companies, when they're running at scale, want to run on supported software. And if you presume those two tenets, then it's very obvious how there's financial opportunities in this acquisition.
Well, there's definitely a transition that happens where people sometimes go from building the application in their garage, their dorm room, departmental application, and then suddenly now the business is dependent on it.
And now we have 100 million users, and they get mighty upset if the service goes down.
And that's where typically that's when the people start to subscribe to the MySQL Enterprise offering.
Right, and I think there used to be a view that when people grow to that scale, they'll change to a different database. They'll change to
they won't.
And the answer is no. And once you understand the basic physics of all that, it's very obvious how this business works and how seeding the market and reaching as many people as possible in the developer stage, in the early adoption phase, and making the access to the core technology free with the notion that architectures don't change and people run on supported software, it's a very obvious business model.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we have a tradition at MySQL, which is we often have a toast. So I think we'll get ready for this. The beverage of choice in the mornings. Well, it's not just for breakfast. It's vodka.
I thought you were going to pour the water.
We have this. No, this is the real stuff. I have a marketing meeting to go to in a little bit. So
can I have a smaller glass?
Smaller glass.
If you have a marketing meeting, you should have two.
Well, I don't know about that.
How did he?
You got a little. Wait. Pour this.
Yeah,
and,
he's not kidding.
For those viewers at home, if you'd like to have a toast with us,
this is the home version of the game.
This is the. Normally we sing a song. We're not going to do that. We're going to do a famous Australian open source toast that was taught to me by Stuart Smith. It's a rich history, long, complicated, but hopefully you can follow it. We'll do it once together, and then you can do it on your own. It goes like this: 1, 2, 3. Cheers.
Cheers.
Now, I also wanted to just mention we have a couple items to wrap up with. I wanted to mention we have the MySQL Users Conference coming up April 14th to 17th in Santa Clara. We'll have some more announcements about integration with Sun, some of the new technologies.
So we're also traveling around the world.
Yes, we have a world tour. So do you want to mention anything about that?
Well, there's a number of senior staff members and open source folks like Ian Murdoch and Simon Phipps and others. I'll be traveling to Russia and to Prague to go visit with the community members, visit with customers, visit with developers to talk about what's going on with MySQL. So this is going to be covering the entire planet and converging on Santa Clara. You might want to talk about that.
Yep. Actually, I already did. But and then actually we have an IRC chat that's going to be taking place later this week. We'll get information out about that. So if you want to follow along there. And then final, very important question we need to settle, just as important as VI versus Emacs. This is a more musical question. Smithereens or 7 Marry 3?
Oh, I'm going with him.
Well, see, one of the problems you have
when
you pass the age of 40 is you don't know who either of those are. So the only reason why Rich deferred is because he has no clue either.
Well, Steve and I like the Smithereens. So we have the Smithereens playing at a Sun gathering in Austin. So it's part of the South by Southwest conference, March 9th. Sun is going to be as a part of this. So if you come to La Zona Rosa, March 9th, 9 p.m., drinks are on Sun. And it should be a lot of fun. And Smithereens had a big hit in the 80s, and 7 Marry 3 had big hits in the 90s.
I was too busy working on Emacs to kind of know that.
Jonathan, we have so much to learn.
Clearly.
And I think that's it, and we'll keep in touch with you guys later on. Okay, hopefully we'll